Okay, so I've worked on the design colors a little bit more and fonts. I did a font pair, tried to get some contrast in there, tried to use a color scheme that I thought looked decent. I maybe could do a couple extra versions with different colors, but I think for this demo, this is looking pretty good. Like I said, I did have to resize the canvas using the properties panel. You just go into edit artboards and then you can kind of drag them around if you need to. You can exit out like that. And you can delete the artboards too by pushing the trash can next to the artboard, but I'm not going to obviously delete this artboard. I deleted the other one that we had. But anyway, I'm just going to Command S to save this. And then next I'm going to go to Brightspace next, actually, because there are templates in Brightspace that we should use. So if you're working in Illustrator, you should use the Illustrator template. If you're working in Photoshop, you should use the Photoshop template, obviously, in week 1 of Brightspace of our course shell, Electronic Design 1. So I'm going to kind of scroll down and download the Illustrator GeoFilter template. And I'll open that once it's downloaded in Illustrator, obviously. And I'll just copy and paste over my design into the template that gets downloaded. It's going to take a while, so I'm going to pause the video. Okay, so it's done downloading. I will just go ahead and it always adds a PS on the end extension for some reason. I'm just going to say use the AI. Oops, I think maybe I already have this one. So I'm just going to give it a slightly different name so I can open it. Here we go. Here it is. So there's 2 artboards here. This is just an example that's been put together. If we look at edit the artboards, you know, there's artboard 1 and artboard 2 here. So let's just Command A to select all. Actually, I need to exit out of that. Command A to select everything on the canvas. Let's group it together with the group button in the properties panel. Just always try to have that properties panel open. So it's grouped. It should be grouped. So Command C to copy, and then we'll just do a Command V to paste it. Actually, it's not a bad size already. That might actually be correct. That just kind of worked out, I think. So we can kind of put some of our design in the buffer zone. I'm looking at what they did, and they do have some of their stars and stuff in the buffer zone. These little areas here that are in gray or that are below or above these lines, these guides in here, that's the buffer area, and we need to leave those free of definitely of all text and probably most of your graphic, especially the more important parts of your graphic. So I'm almost wondering if I shouldn't just keep most of mine out of there, just to make sure that, you know, I'm not going too far into the buffer zone. I'm not quite sure how much of your graphic you can put into the buffer zone. I'm kind of thinking most of it not. Of course, they have some of theirs in there, but not a lot. So, so I'm just using the artboard number 2, right? So if I had another design that I wanted to add to this document, I can always add another artboard by just clicking here, new artboard, and it'll put in a 3rd one. But at least one of your designs needs to be done in Illustrator, and then the other 3, or actually 2 designs you can do in Photoshop, or you could use, even if you wanted to, I wouldn't, you might want to run it by me, but I'd be okay if you had a different program that you wanted to use besides Photoshop or Illustrator for at least one of them. That's fine. So we have this one looking pretty good. These guides won't show up in the final, so let's just do File. I'm going to save this document just so that I have it. I'm going to put it in the GeoFilter. I'll just put the year on it because it. Okay, and then we'll do a file export as. And we'll put that in the Snapchat GeoFilter as well as a PNG file. So we want to do a PNG file, use artboards. Range, we want to put a range on there. We want to do the second artboard because this is artboard 2. The first artboard is just going to be whatever they did in the sample here. So we really want the range of the artboards to just be the second artboard, basically. So if you just put range 2, PNG, use artboards so that we don't get any of the extra stuff that's outside of the artboard. And then just push export that PNG file. We probably want to export it at like, you could do 72. Sometimes I do like medium, but let's just do 72 and just see. I mean, that's technically the resolution for screens, so it should be okay. We want the background color to be transparent. I don't really use this that much, so I wouldn't worry about it too much. Push OK. Okay, now if we go back into that folder in our documents, let's see here. Electronic Design 1, Snapchat GeoFilter. Let's do it by date modified. Here it is. So if we double click on that, we can see that's what it looks like. And that's the AI file that I have open now. So let's look at the size, 55 kilobytes. So that's perfect. That's not too big because sometimes, well, one of the parameters for this is that it has to be under 300 kilobytes. So that's great that it's underneath the amount that we're looking for. And let's just open it up in Photoshop and see what it looks like, just because sometimes I like to open things up in multiple programs. It looks good, doesn't really look blurry. It shouldn't really. I mean, I guess if we start to really zoom into it, it might look a little blurry, but it's not bad. There's another thing that I wanted to talk to you about too, is if we go in here and we actually go into the folder where we saved all this stuff, the PNG file. If I can find it. Here it is. So this is at 55 kilobytes, which is great. It's under 300, but sometimes you might end up exporting out a PNG file that's over the amount that you want. So it'll be over 300 kilobytes. So there are ways to size these things down, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm in Photoshop. I have that PNG that we exported out of Illustrator open in Photoshop. So if we want to make this smaller, we can do File, Export, Save for Web, put it on PNG 24. There's two options here. This one's actually a very much larger file size, I believe. So we'll go to PNG-24, push Done, and then do Save As, File Save As, and then just give it a different name so that we're not saving over the original larger PNG, and then push Save. And then this is where we can kind of change the size. So this is going to be the largest, and that's actually probably going to be bigger than your original, but you actually just go to the smallest file size and then push OK. It takes a while for that to save, but if we go in here, it is a little bit smaller than it was before. So it's down from 55 to 42, so hopefully that can get you by. There's probably other things you can do. I think there's even online converters that will resize your file size with, and you won't lose any quality typically, or not very much, not enough to notice or have any issues. So that's one way of sizing down your file size. Obviously, if you have a GeoFilter PNG out of Illustrator that's already under 300, you don't need to bring it into Photoshop and size it down. You only need to do this when it's actually 300 or above 300. I think it's okay if it's at 300, but also, like, if you went ahead and went into Brightspace and you decided you're going to do one of your GeoFilters in Photoshop, just make sure that you download the Photoshop filter and then open that in Illustrator or in Photoshop. It'll be a PSD file, which is the native working file out of Photoshop, and that's when you can actually, design within Photoshop, much like we did in Illustrator. And I'll actually go over how you would export out your PNGs from your Photoshop template once you have your design looking the way that you want it to. So in Photoshop, this looks a little different. The filter, the template for the filter looks a little different. But you can turn off the buffer zones. These are just sample filters. They're kind of handy, actually, because you can look at different filters that are in here. Just by using the eyeballs, you can turn those off. One of them is for the Meatpacking District in New York City, Huntington Beach. I'm not quite sure where that's at. Just Chillin', or the Sweet Dreams one. It's also nice to look at your filter on a background, so putting a photo behind it just to see what it looks like on an actual background. You can use this photo here if you want, it's fine. But when you export out of So let's see, maybe I will just see what mine looks like in here. Let's just pretend I actually made this one in using the Photoshop tools, you know, and I made this in Photoshop instead of Illustrator. And here it is. It's on its own layer, or groups of layers that you can, you know, put in a folder and make your own little, you know, filter. And I can name this like Mary. I double clicked on that. Mary's Photoshop Geo Filter. So there's that. And this might be on multiple layers that you would actually have to, like, let's say that there's like, you know, a bunch of different layers that I have to bring together. You know, we can put those into a group and name that, you know, Saddle Butte Geo Filter. That's an even better name. But, and then, you know, we can turn off the buffers. I can see what it looks like with a background image. It looks pretty good. It's popping off that background pretty good. We need to turn that off too. And let's just pretend I made this one in Photoshop using the paintbrush tool and, you know, the shape tools and things like that. So I'm going to want to, I'm going to want to do a file, save as, let's see, put this in the right folder under my Snapchat Geo Filter, Saddle Butte Geo Filter. I'll know it's a PSD. I know it's a Photoshop document because it has PSD on the end. The year on there, Photoshop, save. And so we want to definitely save our file out, and then we can do a file export, save for web. We want it on PNG, and then PNG-24 because that's going to be smaller. We make sure the transparency is enabled. Save, put that in there. It's going to be maybe a little bit, I think this should be okay, but I'm going to change the name just a little bit. And then save. And that's how you would get your PNG file out of Photoshop, is just doing that file export, save for web, and choosing the smallest PNG file size that you can, which is the PNG-24, I believe. Anyway, that's all I wanted to show you. If you're wondering which files to submit to me or which, how to submit PNG designs to the Snapchat team, just watch the video in week 3, I believe. I go over all the files I need and all of the process for submitting to Snapchat. You're going to need to do that for sure because I will grade you on that, and I want you to take screenshots of the emails that the Snapchat team sends you after you submit each of your filter designs as PNG files. Yeah, and I think that's about it. So we'll talk to you later.